Okay, so which lawsuit do you want to do first? Do you want to do Parler or you want to do Rumble?
Parler's good.
Okay, so Parler versus Amazon for the time being. Parler, as everyone knows, just the context, but I suspect you all know, pulled from Google, pulled from Apple app stores in the wake of the Capitol Hill riots. Same day, give or take, Amazon Web Services says we're no longer providing web hosting to you, and we're shutting you down, basically with, it was 24 hours notice at most, and pulls the plug, and literally overnight, Parler is wiped from the face of the internet. App doesn't work, and they don't have servers, so they don't have actual internet presence. Parler sues Amazon, seeking, among other things, say damages on the merits, but a temporary restraining order, like an emergency injunction, enjoining Amazon to reestablish, pending the lawsuit, their service so they can minimize their damages. And their argument is basically that this was antitrust violation, punitive to favor Twitter, the competitor of Parler. Amazon files a response, says they were in material breach repeatedly, blah, blah, blah. They were unable to do what we think they ought to have been required to do under the agreement to moderate their content. So we're justified. And Parler responds and says, no, you weren't justified. We were good in your books right up until the day before. Do you want to explain the essence of the antitrust lawsuits, the antitrust law, before we get into the actual lawsuit?
Well, I mean, I think that's probably the weaker component of their claim. But what they just simply pointed out was that Amazon has is financially profits from its relationship with Twitter, and that the more that Parler is unavailable to compete with Twitter, that Amazon will profit more from that than they do from their ongoing contractual relationship with Parler. And so it's a form of tying, though it's a little bit different in this context. The Rumble case is a little bit more cleaner case of tying, but basically that's it. It's just that there's so much economic overlap between these big tech oligarchs who all profit if they help one another at the expense of their separate competitors. But it's easier legally to get away with because the antitrust law has not always been interpreted to apply to that context.
Okay, and you're right, actually. They had three aspects to the claim. I forgot to mention that. Antitrust violation, breach of contract, and the third was... Someone's going to have to remember the third while I go back to the second. So the antitrust claim is probably the harder of the three claims. The breach of contract, which is... And this is interesting. So Parler alleges that they're in breach of contract. The contract provides for a 30-day notice to cure. So if there's a material breach or a material default, Amazon has to notify Parler. Parler has 30 days to cure before Amazon can terminate. Amazon's argument is that we didn't terminate, we suspended, as if to say that there's, we could suspend at will, but we can't terminate at will, which in my view basically means that they have no, if that's the argument, they can terminate at will, just call it a suspension. So what's your take on the breach of contract argument?
They have Parler has a very good argument on breach of contract and should win unless the court just sticks its head in the sand and covers for Amazon, because anybody that's familiar with this industry knows that for these kind of server relationships, your great concern is being turned off overnight. And so what you want protection against that occurring, to have enough time to get a replacement or substitute server company. And so that's why this is where that 30-day provision originated from, and opportunity to cure originated from. So Amazon's relationship with Parler, they promised Parler contractually, we will not terminate our relationship without first giving you an opportunity to cure, and we will give you 30 days to cure before we terminate. So it's basically like a notice provision and an opportunity to cure provision combined. Now, Amazon wanted to protect itself in case something truly illegal was happening, that they could temporarily suspend service until that illicit activity is immediately remedied. That's what they're playing games, and frankly, sometimes they were just flat out lying to the court about why those two contractual provisions exist. And the court will have to be intellectually dishonest to accept Amazon's defense. Because Amazon pretending that, oh, no, we just suspended because we called it a suspension, is a ludicrous interpretation of its own contract, as well as the custom and practices of the industry in interpreting and enforcing that particular contractual provision. Under their interpretation, the termination clause meant nothing. It was utterly unenforceable, utterly useless, unless they themselves use the word. That's a preposterous application. So, and the key that Parler highlighted very effectively was that if this was a suspension, first of all, it would be based on something that they could cure quickly. And secondly, it would be something that they could cure, period. Neither was the case. Amazon made clear to Parler there was nothing they could do to cure, and that the problem they saw it was systemic. So what they were doing was terminating the contract. Amazon clearly breached the contract. And under Ninth Circuit law, some people were asking, well, couldn't you just recover in economic damages? And typically you don't get an injunction where you can recover in monetary damages, but not in the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit has said the destruction of your business is a separate, independent right to a temporary injunction. And clearly Parler has that in spades. So in reading all the briefs, I was curious, was Amazon going to have a defense as to how did it have some loophole or exemption? Instead, Amazon's defense, aside from, hey, judge, pretend this was a suspension, not a termination, in a way that's just a patently absurd interpretation of the contract and would make the judge a laughingstock if he said so, doesn't stop them, of course, but that would be where it would go. And its real predicate was political. It's, hey, we thought Parler did something really bad, and we are politically coming to the defense of the country and the nation. Nick Rekieta had a good explanation on his channel when he was doing an interview with Eric Hunley of the Unstructured podcast, which we recommend to people, which was that, and it reminded me of several books I'd read on this exact topic when he was talking about it in the context of Jack Dorsey and Twitter, that these guys have a version of a messianic complex, these big tech, your Bezos of the world. They're here to protect. They're more motivated by that often than they are by money, than they are even by power or control, that they are here to rescue and save the world. They had that's kind of what motivated, I think, Lynn Wood. And so it's counter-rational behavior, and from an economic standpoint, but it's consistent with their true modus operandi. And that was basically their defense. Their defense really was, okay, judge, yeah, we breached the contract, but these people are bad people who promoted an insurrection. So just pretend the law isn't what the law is, and pretend the contract meant something different than it did, because here's our political defense. They don't have a legal defense. They have a political defense. And if the judge, now I'll give them credit, it's a Western District of Washington, a lot of iffy judges up in that district. It's in federal court, but they got a Carter appointee. So if I were ranking appointees, and if the only thing I knew about a judge was their presidential appointment, which, by the way, I've found to be highly predictive of how a judge behaves, their personality, temperament, you name it. There's like a weird association between who appointed a judge and their nature. Not as much in Trump's case, in large part because of the Federalist Society's monopolization of that. But so for example, if I was ranking them, my favorite judge would probably still be a Trump appointee. My second favorite judge would be a Carter appointee. And then down from there, W appointees third, Clinton appointees fourth, Obama appointees last. They got a Carter appointee, is my understanding. So they're in the game. Those kind of judges tend to be commonsensical, tend to be fairness oriented, and they're going to think this punishment is excessive from a political perspective, and that legally Amazon doesn't have a defense. Amazon broke the rules and doesn't want to pay a consequence for it because they were doing it in the name of some higher calling.
But now, if you say it's a Carter appointee, how old is this judge?
Old.
Because all that I can do is think about my first, and I say not my only, but one of my first experiences talking in front of a judge about things like SEO, building traffic on Facebook, and how to value an online business. The judge, I say this without judgment, was what they call semi-retired. What do they call them? Surnuméraire in Quebec. So semi-retired.
In the States, they call them senior status.
See, so she was senior, but no, I'm not saying that to make fun of age. Semi-retired family law judge who, after 20 minutes, told all the parties that she understood search engine optimization, and then I knew that we were going to be in trouble. So, I mean, if you're getting a judge who, I am not playing ageism. Maybe my dad is more into tech than I am and knows more than I do. So some do and some don't. I might be nervous that a judge is not going to have any appreciation of how the internet works. And someone's going to say, well, get your own servers. And the judge is going to say, hey, look, why didn't you get your own servers type thing?
And there may be that, but usually a judge like this, because Bertelsmann is similar, the federal judge presiding over a lot of the Covington cases, Carter appointee, they often tend to be more old school. So Bertelsmann's done some interesting rulings in some prior cases in the defamation context. He actually tried to gut Section 230. He thought it should read the way it was written and not the way the courts have construed it. So that you tend to get them like that. So because they're not neck deep in the high tech world, they sit there and say, well, do you have a contract? Okay. Did you breach it? Yeah. Okay. What's the remedy? Okay. Ninth Circuit, here's what it is. So if he behaves like a typical Carter judge, Amazon should win. Now, no guarantee.
Do you mean Parler or Amazon?
I'm sorry, Parler should win. Okay. Parler should win. Amazon should lose. Parler should win.
Now, someone had asked if any of us are privy to the actual agreement. I have not seen the actual agreements. You've been reading the briefs. Have you seen the actual agreements?
My understanding is it was copied, but I thought it was sealed. So I thought it was attached as an exhibit, but I watched Nick Rekieta go through them all as well, and I think he was having some difficulty getting access to some of the underlying documents because some of them were sealed. Not all of them were. So but Amazon didn't dispute that. I was as soon as I saw Amazon's response, my curious was, are they going to say there's actually a contractual exception to this 30-day notice to cure? And they didn't even talk about it. And that's why I was like, okay. You guys got caught your hand in a cookie jar, and you're just praying that politics is going to save you. And maybe it will, but it would be very embarrassing to have when you have everybody in the industry has this contract for this reason. And the contract says exactly what it says. And when you're in front of the judge saying, no, we didn't terminate them, we just suspended them, but it's permanent and they can't fix it. Oh, come on.
And incidentally, I didn't quote the part from the lawsuit as to what Amazon said. We're suspending it if you need, and we'll help you migrate. We're going to save your data and we'll help you migrate to new servers, as if that's what you do during a suspension. Now, yeah. It's true. I presume, if there's a certain video, like I don't want to name any events, but if there's a video that's online, you could imagine that they could suspend for whatever in urgency, and then say take the video down, or it's an unfolding event.
That's exactly what that suspension rule is there for. It under their interpretation, the termination provision has no impact. So that's the problem. You can't have a contractual provision that is a critical, essential contractual provision that is completely inconsequential to the economic relationship. So there's no good argument that this is a suspension. And basically, they're asking the judge, hey, judge, lie to the world and pretend this was a suspension because we're on the right side of the politics.
And someone I brought up the comment before where someone said, if Amazon wins, it'll do more damage than good to them because every one of their customers is going to realize their contract, not their contract, but the termination provision or the remedy division, the cure provision means nothing. And everyone doesn't matter.
Well, I've been educating people on this for, really a couple of years, but now everybody's getting more educated on it. That, don't use MailChimp. MailChimp's unreliable. They're political. They'll revoke your access right away. Don't use a lot of the conventional campaign methods of either payment processing or other things if you can avoid it. Have backups. Have something else if you can. And they're going to lose business. Now, it's because Bezos and Dorsey and Zuckerberg care more about their messianic image than they do about making money. Maybe not Zuckerberg. There's an open question there. But that's why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, Zuckerberg goes out and admits, okay, yeah, our stock has dropped 12%, 15%, whatever it is. But, it was really kind of a dangerous thing that we did, but we're still going to do it because we're on the moral righteous cause. And not even be self-referential, aware in complaining about Uganda blocking you once you start doing this. I think Twitter did not expect the backlash. Like, they didn't expect someone like Merkel in Germany to say this is a dangerous thing. Didn't expect the president of Mexico, who's to the left, say maybe we need to get rid of social media in our own country because we can't. Everybody around the world was like, if you can do this to Trump while he's president, they expected them to do it to Trump after he was gone. Them doing it while he was president, they're like, hold on a second, you're not going to run our lives all around the world. So that's a no-go. And they overestimated greatly their position of power. They're going to start to get blowback, I suspect, not only from a bunch of politicians around the world, but from courts. We're already seeing it in a recent Canadian case.
Yeah, and incidentally, so there were some politicians who were critical of Dorsey and Twitter, but you got to love it that the government only gets critical when they realize that private enterprise has more power than they do. They want to be the ones, like China understood this a long time ago. You don't let Google or Facebook control it. You control it. Exactly. But I know it is interesting. The reaction was it was interesting, and we'll see if they learn anything, but they may not.
It'd be great if Parler wins. I think they should win because it will enforce that 30-day provision for everybody else and will not allow the big tech companies. A lot of companies have these exact 30-day language in it of either notice to cure or 30 days notice before they can terminate. And this was both. This was a hybrid of both. I mean, Parler, I see why now Parler thought they were safe. They had contractually negotiated for a very strong notice, not only a 30-day notice, but a 30-day opportunity to cure provision. And Amazon wouldn't allow them to do either. Amazon didn't say, okay, you have 30 days to fix this or we'll terminate, or give them 30 days notice. Oh, we're going to terminate in 30 days either way. They breached both. And they're like, but judge, and not only that, here's the other problem. Factually, they're false. Amazon claimed that they misled the court about the way their relationship with Twitter. They pretended that they don't really quite have the server relationship with Twitter that they have by what the difference between hosting the feed versus hosting Twitter in other capacities. But the other component is they accused they did all these citations of problematic tweets. Almost every or parlays, as they're called in Parler, almost every single one is First Amendment protected speech. So like almost none of them were illicit incitement. Their language I don't like and don't approve of, but they're all First Amendment. None of it was go do this at this time at this place. It didn't meet the true threats jurisprudence. It didn't meet the imminent incitement jurisprudence. And then it turns out, as Glenn Greenwald and others have documented, that it's Amazon's pals, Facebook and Twitter, where a lot of this was organized and worse threats were taking place. In fact, Amazon itself was busy selling Kill Trump t-shirts while they were bringing this claim.
I think it was Republicans. It wasn't specific to Trump. It was, kill Republicans. I saw the shirt. Let me bring this comment.
By the way, for everybody out there, turns out no one that's been arrested used Parler. Yeah, so this whole allegation that we had to do this because of Parler was being used to create the second Civil War in America. And it turns out nobody that's arrested even used Parler. I mean, so even their messianic pitch turned out to be bogus.
I want to clarify this point, Paul. Think about that one, Viva. China is a good example of governance. That wasn't my point. My point is that that's a good example of tyrannical government who realizes that you don't want to let a private enterprise have more power than the government. And when they see, I don't think Merkel and I think it was Macron were criticizing Twitter because they thought it was an excess infringement on free speech. I think they're just criticizing them because only the government gets to make that type of infringement on free speech in their minds, not nobody. So China is just a good example of how they understood the power and they wanted to keep that power in order to keep control over the people. Someone asked about the two. Oh, sorry. Actually, it's a good point about misleading the court because I think they misled me and I may have reiterated or repeated that statement. In their response, they said, we could not have shut Twitter down because we don't host their servers. Or sorry, what did they say?
Host their feed.
They don't host their feed. Now, so that's not black and white. They do host
They have a much more close relationship with Twitter than they're suggesting, and so what they were making a technical distinction that's not a legally consequential distinction for their power in that relationship.
Okay,
and they're just hoping that the judge. But if I'm Parler, I don't really care about that so much. My point is solely, that's more on the political rhetorical side. It's a simple argument. This was clearly a termination. If it breached. The remedy is immediate injunctive relief under Ninth Circuit law. End of story.
Yeah, but now it's already been a week. So why haven't they? Are they going to have a viva voce hearing, or is it just going to be written pleadings and the judge is going to adjudicate?
Be up to the judge. I mean, these days they're doing hearings by Zoom. So the judge does a hearing, it'll be by Zoom. The older judges doing it by Zoom is a little interesting, but he could just issue a ruling on the paper, the way the judge did in the Linwood Pro Hoc Vice case, where he just issued a ruling on paper. So a lot of them these days are just issuing rulings on paper. So either there'll be a hearing scheduled this week, or the judge will issue a ruling on the paper this week.
Okay, and interesting, the thing that I forgot to mention, the third claim, which people reminded me, thank you, tortious interference with business expectancy. So I mean, that is, if we're ranking the claims in order of success, likelihood of success, you go breach of contract, tortious interference, antitrust, and so the thing is, like, they have to build the argument that the reason Amazon pulled the plug was to tortiously interfere with contracts that they knew or ought to have known were going to be in the works or were in fact in the works. And so the argument is going to be that Amazon knew that there was going to be traffic being driven to Parler by virtue of their canceling Trump on the platform, on Twitter. And so Amazon comes in to sort of ebb that influx of traffic to Parler, thereby interfering with its contractual relationships. What do you think?
Well, I think that's why they did what they did. I don't think what they did was for the moral high cause they claim, because if it was for the latter, they would have given him some time to remedy. They did it because they didn't want. In fact, I think it's partially why Twitter jumped the gun on removing Trump. In part, they wanted to show their moral superiority to everybody, but the other reason was there had been rumors that Trump was going to use his Twitter account to sync Twitter. He was going to say on Twitter right after he left the presidency, "I'm leaving Twitter. This place stinks." Some Trump phraseology. It's losing money. It's a failure, whatever. And I'm going here to Parler, say, or wherever else he can cut a deal with, and that would have led to a mass exodus of double what Twitter actually lost. Twitter, it looks to me, lost about 10 to 15%. I know I lost about 15% of my followers that are now no longer on Twitter, about 30,000 people, give or take. And looking at others, it's pretty comparable. So that probably means somewhere around 7 to 10% of all Twitter users left or were shut down. But their bigger concern is not just the number of people who are no longer on Twitter, but over half of the users of Twitter interacted with Trump's account. The concern is the massive decline in use of Twitter. And people don't realize that often matters more than the number of users on Twitter from an economic stock perspective. And as we forecast last week, they took a massive, massive hit, as did Facebook. Took a massive economic hit. You can see, I think they didn't think the market would react the way it did. They didn't understand that not everybody's aligned with hey, be a messianic hero and sink the value of my stock. That this is the echo chamber that they're trying to create. The big tech oligarchs are themselves inside of.
It's interesting. Someone had just asked why Trump didn't take the precautions before, he knew that they were going to block him. I responded, I think it was silly. Something was the avatar. I don't think anyone thought they were going to do it before he left office. So it's the brass cojones that it takes to block the sitting president, even if he's a lame duck 2 weeks left, to do it to a sitting president. I don't think anybody thought they were going to do it. So it's not like you could prepare for that. And
I mean, it would be like if ABC, CBS, and NBC didn't. I mean, what if every method of communication was shut down and they didn't allow the president of the United States to communicate to his own citizens? I mean, that's the implications. And that was the implication that shocked a lot of leaders around the world. Not only was it that they think they should be in control of it, they're like the idea that some, Jack Dorsey, some, hipster homeless looking dude can decide that I can't talk to my own constituents. I don't think so. So I think they're going to get much more blowback than they ever anticipated. They don't have the alignment that they thought they did. And they're in political and legal trouble.
And we're counting the days down. I'm predicting it. It was your recommendation. I'm going with the prediction. They're going to face a class action shareholder dispute because they cost people money, real money, because of their virtuous regard.
And because they lied. They told the market, we won't do this. And then they did. So there's Section 230 covers a lot of sins. It doesn't cover lying and stealing from stockholders. That's one place where you don't have protection.
We're bringing this one up, and we're going to talk about it, I guess, in Rumble. Sorry, but their 230 defense, not a chance.
No. So Section 230 is not a defense to any of the claims that